Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, a ticket to the show. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, a lot of people like to speculate, dubiously in fact, on short-term price movements for Bitcoin. In fact, many people will day trade and claim they're making money doing so. But really, the best strategy for basically everyone out there, in my opinion, is long-term views on the market. Not short-term speculative views, not something that we could basically write off as a random walk or geometric Brownian motion, but looking at the big picture. Okay, we want to look at the big picture for cryptocurrency as a whole asset class and also specifically for Bitcoin. So do not miss the forest for the trees. And I'm just going to go over a few charts. We show these charts on the channel all the time, but I just want to show a few different ones so that you can make sure you have the right outlook on Bitcoin and you're not forsaking your potential investments because of what's going on some Tuesday in 2021 or something. Okay. So as of December 11th, the entire asset class was coming in at around 2.26 trillion. And we are still fairly close to the fair value line. And you can see this green dash line will be approaching 10 trillion by the middle of next year. Okay, so by the middle of next year, we would expect the entire asset class, the upper green trend line, to be at 10 trillion. Now, that doesn't mean that the entire asset class will make it to 10 trillion by the middle of next year, but what this shows is that it's possible for it to be at those levels if it ends up being a market cycle peak at that time. If say, a future theoretical market cycle peak comes later, then it could be further out. Now, again, this is not just Bitcoin. This is the entire asset class. So that is something to keep in mind. Some people say, well, Bitcoin at 10 trillion, that's pretty high for this cycle. Again, this is the entire asset class, not just Bitcoin. So one of the things we've shown before is this, and the idea, generally speaking, that the cycles are the angle of attack for each cycle is not quite as steep, and they extend further and further out each time. And so the general idea is that we should still have quite a long ways to go this market cycle. Now, look, in the short term, it's really hard to know what's going to happen. Right now, Bitcoin is trading for about $50,000. Earlier today, we were at like 49K, 48K. In the last couple of hours, we're actually above 50K. So it's really hard to know what's going to happen in the short term. Could we go back down? Yes, we could. Could we climb higher? Of course. I don't have a crystal ball, but what we can say is that over the macro scale, the asset class trends higher. And I would even argue that within this market cycle, I think we will trend higher. But furthermore, even if you don't believe in the idea of market cycles or anything like that, one thing you can still look at is to say that, well, the asset class still generally trends higher with time. Okay, that's the important thing to remember, is that it trends higher with time. I do like to capitalize on local bubbles, which is why I was very bearish back in April and May, because we went up so quickly, so fast. But I also don't want people to feel discouraged if they just held through it, or maybe they started buying at that time for the very first time. And look, I know it can be tempting to sell occasionally, especially if you're in the red. But those that tend to stick around tend to do the best. And again, this is not financial advice. This is just based on historical data. One of the things we can look at are the logarithmic regression of Bitcoin and what we would expect over the next several years. Now, you should know the logarithmic regression, I think, in my opinion, is only useful with a current fit for the duration of that market cycle. So in the future, whenever we have a major bear market bottom, we would want to refit the logarithmic regression curves based on what the peak ended up being, what the bottom is, so that we can get a good projection for the following cycle. For instance, this green band was fit somewhere back over here before the March 2020 capitulation. So it was fit somewhere before the March 2020 capitulation, and it still held up extremely well, right? We went to the bottom of the band, we came up, we held resistance here on the top of the band, but we have not gone in it yet. Just like we did go in it back in 2017, we went in it in 2013. So right now, I would argue we're in no man's land, right? We're not We're not, say, at these crazy mania levels, but we're also not at the crazy oversold levels either on monthly timeframes. But regardless, even no matter where you think we are, if you're looking at Bitcoin as some investment, then you could still argue that, look, whatever happens, whether we go up or down in the short term, we're still trending higher with time. Now, again, I think that the cycle is not over. I think we're going to put in new all-time highs and continue higher even into 2022 and maybe beyond. But for now, what we can say is that, look, if you look at this like a multi-year investment, then we can say that it generally does trend up with time. Okay? So that's important to note. The other thing that I think is interesting to look at is the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 year ROI of Bitcoin. It is decreasing over the macro scale. This is in line with the basic idea of diminishing returns. But what you notice is that this is a logarithmic scale, and anything above 10 to the 0, which is 1, means you're getting some type of return on your investment. Of course, it's not accounting for inflation or say, the devaluation of the dollar or anything. But when you look at this, you'll notice that, look, I mean, even the 4-year ROI has a history of being over 10x. If you isolate the 4-year ROI, this is what it looks like. What's going on right now? Why is it going down so much? Well, if you think about it, the price of Bitcoin has dropped over the last several weeks. 4 years ago, Bitcoin was going parabolic to 20K, okay? And so we're basically comparing a parabolic Bitcoin 4 years ago to a Bitcoin that's had a 30% pullback today. 4 years ago, the price on December 17th hit about $20,000, and considering the price is only about $50,000, and we're only 2.5x up from that time. We haven't hit that peak yet in terms of 4 years ago because we still had about a few more days to go, but you can see that's why it's dropped off. Now, historically, there have been 2 major times when it dropped off like that on the 4-year ROI of Bitcoin. Once was in 2015. That led into a pretty good 2016, 2017. And then this drop here was earlier to mid 2017, which preceded a fairly nice move later on. So look, when you look at the 4-year ROI, no matter whether you are, no matter really where you're buying at all, it generally is a fairly good 4-year ROI. And if you had bought Bitcoin anytime and then waited 4 years, you would never have been, I mean, you would really have always been up at least 2x so far, right? Always. Historically, always at least 2x up. A majority of the time, you would have been 10x up. Now, over time, this will continue to come down because of diminishing returns, but it is something to keep in mind, okay? So, the point of all this is to say that day trading and leverage trading and all that stuff is extremely risky. It's extremely risky. And the opportunity cost of doing that stuff is quite high. I think a majority of people are much better suited to timing long-term shifts in the market and or just holding for the long term and viewing it as an investment, not as some day trading strategy that's probably going to get you wrecked. Okay, so at the end of the day, when we look at all of these charts, what can we say? Over the next several years, I would expect your portfolio to grow. You don't always have to time the tops and the bottoms. You just need a ticket to the show.